Sorry for taking so long to come into this video. Scott and I had a chat just about various things and cathartic. Was it cathartic? Probably more frustration. But here we go again. Hello, darkness, my old friends. I've come to talk with you again. Yes, it's the latest from Heart Standard. My name is Joe Skett, and I am joined on this miserable Monday afternoon by Scott McIntosh. Scott, what's worse, this weather we're having in Aldreekie or Heart of Midlothian Football Club starts this season?
Well, the weather's temporary. The Hearts form may be permanent just now, just going on what we've been seeing. So yeah, I think we've got to go with the weather just now. That's an easy one to answer.
Oh, geez. So basically this video podcast is going to be two parts essentially. We'll look back at yesterday's game, 1-0 defeat to Dundee United, which made it 6 defeats on the spin, 7 without a win to start the season. No doubt we'll repeat ourselves with a few things just because it was very much deja vu at large parts of watching yesterday's match, and then we'll assess where the club go from here now that we have thankfully reached an international break and we get a couple of weeks off from watching Hearts in their current guise. So Scott, what did you make of the start? We'll talk about the game first. What did you make of the starting 11? Because there was certainly a few eyebrows raised when it got announced.
Yeah, I think the Stephen Kingsley decision is probably the biggest eye raiser, and again, it's not so much on the individual himself. I think in certain fixtures, having Stephen Kingsley play right back wouldn't actually be that bad a shout. I think he can make that his role a position that he can play if we are playing very defensive and we don't have the ball, or we're not expected to have the ball in the opponent's half for the majority of the game. Then I think Stephen Kingsley at right back can be deployed in certain situations. I just felt that yesterday probably wasn't one of those examples, and in fact, and I get why he's went to the 4. I think he knew that playing with a 3 would set the mood music amongst the fans before a ball had even been kicked. But really, in essence, as soon as Taylor's not available, you really can't play the 4. I think you've probably got to go with some form of a 3-5-2 or 3-4-3 formation, and probably, take a bit of a gamble and play a Forrest or an Oda in that wing-back role. So yeah, I think that was probably the most disappointing aspect. I think the rest of the team, again, I don't think it's so much about personnel, it's about how we're deploying those players, and then the decision-making of those players throughout the match. That's probably the bigger issue just now for me.
Yeah. I think the big thing with the right back situation is that we signed 2 right backs and we're playing a left-sided.
I think we've signed 1 right back. I definitely wouldn't class Oyegoke as a.
No, yes,
I mean, yeah,
that's the fact that he's played there and adds depth to it. We've obviously. I'm not rewriting history. We've got Nathaniel Atkinson. I know a lot of people have said about him, but I mean, again, he's not the answer. So, like you,
he's not even training with the first team. So
no.
It's not an issue where they can even bring him back in. I mean, he's so far out the picture. It's just not viable.
But I completely agree with you. There's certainly some instances where you probably can get away with Kingsley as a right back, but in a game like yesterday, you just saw how uncomfortable and awkward it was at times trying to play out, and then you've kind of had width on the right, and then there were so many times even on the left where just again looking at the setup that Penrice was motoring forward. He was like almost looking to play a ball forward to someone in that vicinity, but Vargas was moving infield. So then Spittle, who, let's face it, it's not the greatest runner in terms of covering ground quickly, i.e. he's not fast. Just more words to describe someone who's not fast. So he was having to make up a lot of ground to kind of get out there. Yeah, so it was. It kind of just felt a wee bit disjointed. But saying that, on a positive kind of element, I thought the team started well, and they needed to start well. They needed to get the crowd on side, and they did that. And one thing we'll say about it before talking about that start, the crowd, until going 1-0 behind, largely were very patient and stuck behind the team. It wasn't that they weren't as antsy as maybe a lot of people were expecting, and then understandably showed the frustration both full time and when going behind. But to begin with, I thought there was a lot to be positive about in relation to the performances recently.
Yeah, I thought they moved the ball relatively quickly enough in that opening sort of 10 to 15 minutes. I think the biggest problem that we face is starting positions for the players. So I think as soon as you know that Dundee United are pretty much playing a low block, which is what most clubs are going to utilise just now, given the problems that we're having, both in our home and away fixtures. I think what you really need to see then is your centre halves pushing 10, 15 yards further up the park. You then need the likes of Grant and Spittle to be finding space in behind their midfield and in between their midfield and backline. But again, I think because there's such a lack of quality in playing out from the back through our centre halves, the likes of Grant and Spittle then find themselves coming deeper and deeper to try and retrieve the ball, which then means that Shanklin has to come back to fill the 10, and it means that Vargas and Oda, although they may create space at times, there's no one in a central position to exploit it. So although there was signs of a bit of progress in terms of how quickly we were moving the ball, there's still an issue in terms of where players are finding themselves when we've got possession, and that seems to be the biggest issue. There's no, and again, we're not just saying this after 2 or 3 games. This is a year on.
Yeah.
There's still the same problems, and I think against Pilsen last Thursday, I think there was a conscious effort to try and get Devlin and Grant as close to the forwards as they could. But again, the problem with that is that you're creating such a big gap between forward to defence that there's nobody there sort of linking that play. And I think Boateng's very good at recycling the ball, and that's ostensibly why we signed him. We signed him to be competition for Benny in that number 6 position. But what we're trying to ask him to do now, which I think has been quite apparent in the last 3 fixtures, is we're almost try to force him into being a ball carrier for midfield, and that's not his forte. I think he'll give it a go. I think he's quite good at giving most things a go, but it's not really his particular strength. So again, the issue isn't so much around the formation that we pick, it's around whether we've got the right personnel and whether we've actually got people starting in the right positions.
Yeah, I thought Kent and Halkett, the use of the ball, I thought it was okay to begin with. I thought they played, especially they went longer a couple of times, and it worked because it was turning Dundee United's defence, and it was just essentially getting Hearts up the pitch and into territory and putting pressure on the United defence. And I think that's how the crowd responded to it. But yeah, as the game went on, there was moments where they would get the ball and kind of within own half and then have just acres of space. This isn't just a Hearts gripe of mine. This is see it so many times where you just want, why doesn't the defender just step in and kind of commit? And then that's way you're taking a wee bit of a risk, but at the moment Hearts need to take as many risks as possible when playing. Take a risk, step in, and try and get a United midfielder or something. Just move them around, and then you shift the ball, and then that's where you start to move. But again, it's like the thought process behind it. The thought process behind it too slow. Naismith talked about it, too slow to move the ball, and then another aspect of frustration in terms of how we move the ball. Again, probably not just a Hearts issue, but the amount of times where a ball is played behind a teammate or played to his feet, and you're trying to gain momentum, and you want the ball, for example, if it's going out to James Penrice, play it a couple of yards in front of him, so he's running onto it, and then you're getting momentum. But then it's always kind of to the side, or again, that's just a personal frustration, but I think it leads in, it kind of leans into just how slow and predictable that Hearts can be. And as Graham says, we don't look like we have a game plan. It's so slow and predictable and easy to play against. There's no pace, and we're creating very little. It's extremely concerning. It's kind of spot on all incidents there. And you go to Jim Goodwin's comments from yesterday, and he talked a lot about Steven Naismith and being in that position. But what stood out for me was just the way he looked at the game. He was saying that, so I thought Hearts started really brightly. We weren't sure in the build-up to the game what system we were going to start with. So we were trying to work on 1 or 2 things through the week. I kind of thought they might go with the back 4, given they finished the game midweek in Europe quite strongly. Disagree with that. But I just thought it took us 5 or 10 minutes to adjust to that. I thought they were getting a little bit too much joy in the wide areas and 2v1s. Once we'd done that, I think we were quite comfortable. We were quite happy to sit there in our low block and try and hit them on the counter attack. And I think that's what you saw after 20, 25 minutes. I turned to my colleague and basically said, Hearts need to score. in the next wee while. Otherwise, that momentum, that positive start, it's going to dwindle away, and Dundee United look like they're getting more comfortable.
Yeah, and I think so. And I know what Graham's mentioning there about the lack of there being a game plan. I think there is a game plan. I think it'd be disrespectful to suggest that managers who have their coaching badges and get to this level of the game don't know how to work on a set plan from Monday to Friday. I think
it's the execution.
Yeah, I think the core aspect of what's missing just now at Hearts, and it was the same under Robbie and that towards the end, is that I think the message is getting lost on the players and the manager's voice is not hitting on the players. And I think you saw that towards Robbie's end. You saw how visibly frustrated he would be during games, and you're thinking, right, so the players aren't doing what you want them to do, so it means that you do have a game plan. The problem now isn't the fact that you don't have an idea on how to change things. It's the fact that your voice seems to have got lost on players. And it happens at elite football. You get managers like Antonio Conte that specifically only spend 1 or 2 years at clubs because they know that the players, after a set amount of time, will just stop listening to them. That message just appears to get lost. Now, again, where there's an issue with Steven Naismith here is that I don't think it's ever really landed in terms of how we progress with the ball. Again, last season, if you were to then sort of start to analyse it again, you would view it as pretty much the same sort of ponderous style of play coming out for the back, but we had that X factor and we were that little bit, tighter at the back as well, whereas now we don't really have those other things going for us. So that to me is the issue. It's not so much that Naismith doesn't have a game plan, it's the fact that there doesn't seem to be a buy-in from the players, and that's either, whether that's lack of confidence or maybe just lack of ability in some players, that they're unable to do the things that he wants. I think Cammy Devlin's maybe a good example of that in terms of in possession. It still all points to the manager being the issue ultimately. You can't get rid of a whole squad. So that's why it's Steven Naismith's name that's getting mentioned all the time just now by the media and by various pundits, because ultimately the buck stops with him. Whether it's a lack of game plan, lack of confidence, or his message just not relating to the players, it ultimately still ends up at his feet, unfortunately.
Because I've seen it in kind of the vantage point of where we sit press box, whether it's at Tynecastle or away games. Seen it with Robbie Nielsen, where he's like, Hearts fans are kind of moaning about, if Hearts fans are moaning, like, oh, we're not passing forward quick enough, we're not getting the ball forward quick enough, we're sitting too deep. Every time, like in all those games, Robbie Nielsen, well, it's Robbie Nielsen and Steven Naismith, they've been shouting for the team to get up. They've been shouting for the team to play quicker. They've been shouting for the team to get the ball forward quicker or move it quicker and be more attacking. So there's so kind of exactly what you said is that that obviously there's an issue between what the manager wants and what's being delivered, the execution of it, and I think that's perhaps the biggest frustration. Well, there's maybe not the biggest, but certainly one of the key frustrations is we saw last season how the team progressed through the season, and then you thought, right, perfect, we've brought in, well, on paper, people were thinking good transfer business, and then you're thinking, right, that now is the time to kick on under Naismith and have a bit more of the style that maybe he wanted, he promised when he came in the door. But it's, rather than go that way, it's regressed, and that's why it's like the kind of the message of it's only the start of the season, new players adapting. I don't think that I can't really accept that just because you can turn around. Look at Dundee United. I think they had 6 new signings in their in their team yesterday. I think they made 13 altogether. Motherwell the other week, I think they made about 13 signings. When you look at Dundee United, it was very, very organised, and I know it's much easier to set a team up to be hard to beat and resolute. But at the moment, kind of leading on to the next point, I just feel there's such a vulnerability and inevitability about this Hearts team at the moment. So just as the game progressed, I was just expecting Dundee United to score.
Yeah, I mean, and look, balance of fairness, Dundee United will hit these problems that we've got later on. So it's, and I think this is where I've tried to have a wider conversation around the issues that sort of plague Scottish football out with the Old Firm. I think there's many examples of a Steven Naismith style of manager coming in and providing a short-term solution to a club, whether it be Barry Robson at Aberdeen, Jack Ross at Hibs, Stephen Robinson at Motherwell, Jim Goodwin potentially at Dundee United, where they can deal with that churn recruitment over a summer if they know that fans are going to be happy to get results first and foremost. And I think Goodwin will get that goodwill over the next few months. The problem then comes when fans, the expectation moves on to wanting something a little bit better than that and expecting a little bit better. And I think that's where Steven Naismith finds himself this season. This isn't a black and white way of looking at it. Steven Naismith isn't either a bad manager or a good manager. It's just around whether what he can offer just now is suitable to what Hearts need and also this group of players need. And that's where there's potentially a conversation that needs to be had around what he's doing up to this point. I've not got a problem with or a fear of Hearts playing away to Celtic in a couple of weeks, because I think Steven Naismith's already shown over the last year that he can set us up in those fixtures to be competitive and maybe even get a result or a surprise. The issues then, St Mirren away the week after that and Ross County
at home.
At home. It's what we do in possession when we've got 65 to 70% of the ball. So I think, again, it goes past just Steven Naismith. I think there's a long-term structure of how Hearts play football, from youth football all the way up, that the board need to look at. It isn't just about Steven Naismith's position. It's just about whether we're set up for going past that initial first season of consolidating and being hard to beat, which is what we were last year. Again, I'm like you. I think on paper, we look to be bringing in players that could maybe bring a bit more spark. You've got the likes of Danda and Spittle, who are coming off of career best sort of performances. But again, they're finding space at a premium compared to where they were when they were playing for teams in the bottom six. So again, it's about players maybe just not quite adjusting to their surroundings, which I agreed to that to an extent when Steven Naismith said that post-match yesterday, that it's a settling in. But then how is he helping with that when there's such a lack of continuity in team selection and formation? So yeah, this is where, again, unfortunately, I feel like a broken record, but it comes back round to the manager again. And this is where it's not just about a defeat or two in isolation. That's fine. We're Hearts. I think we're pretty much well versed with dealing with that. I think it's looking at the wider scale, which is, can we see it changing under the current guy, the current setup and the current group of players? I think I would have liked to have seen us bringing in our forward. I can appreciate why that hasn't happened, potentially because we've got a bloated squad already. But what we need in these types of fixtures is somebody that we can go back to front to and try and almost scramble that opening goal in, open teams up, and then that allows us to maybe, have a bit more time on the ball and play a bit more possession football without the fear of trying to knock down this low block that most teams deploy. So that, to me, was a missed opportunity last week. I think bringing in someone that would have just gave us that physical presence up top, it would have just offered us something in the openings of games, where just now we are struggling, like you say, after that opening 10-15, the away team know that they've got the fans reasonably, not angsty. I agree with you. I think yesterday the fans were patient, but it's all about just, trying to get the fans on board and keeping them on side and trying to get that opening goal by any means necessary. And then if you do have a particular game plan that you want to implement, it's easier to do so when the other team have got something to chase and there's a bit more urgency at their end.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the striker, I thought, just looking at the options, and it summed up yesterday, we didn't really have I don't really have a striker on the bench because Musa wasn't on the bench. James Wilson was playing with the B team, and Liam Boyce was, I think, picked up the injury against Pilsen. So yeah, you've massively short there. I was off the view, it's like not just that, but the striker's not the main issue, because the lack of chance creation is a huge issue as well. But like you said, a big physical striker is, I think, when you just look at the Scottish football and how the Premiership is and the culture of Scottish football, in that I think you need a centre-back who can dominate in there and win his headers and win his duels. We've got two of those in Halkett and Kent. Obviously, Kent's been more consistent. Halkett's been injured, and I do think you need someone you can go back to front to, like you said. And it means that teams are more reluctant to camp out on the edge of the box if you've got a boy that you can chuck the ball to and he's going to cause havoc. I look at, for example, Kyle Vassell. I think it's a really good example of that kind of physical striker. He can play a bit, but he can put himself about, and he just gives you a focal point. And for all these qualities, Lawrence Shankland, you don't really just want to chuck the ball up to Lawrence Shankland. He's strong, but he's just not that type of striker.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, this is where it goes back to someone with Steven Naismith's history and time spent in Scottish football should have the awareness to know these things. So he doesn't really have the excuse of saying, oh, well, I'm new to the game, I'm new to the style of football up here. I think having a bit more of a variance in terms of styles of play would be good. And I get it. I know that some people don't like to see that style of football. I personally don't mind it if it means that we're seeing more chances created and there's a bit more goal-mouth action. I'd rather watch that than see us have 70% possession, but have an XG of under 1, which is all we've had so far this season. So yeah, I think there was a missed opportunity last week in terms of bringing somebody in that could just get us out of jail when we are struggling to break teams down. And again, you would think that after watching us play this certain way for over a year now, that's something that would have been identified during the summer, and it's a shame that it hasn't been.
I know. I definitely know we were looked at forwards or strikers in the window, but I'm not sure they're quite. I'm not sure any were kind of a big physical like Kyle Vassell, or I know Sam Cosgrove was mentioned, even though he wasn't at Tynecastle on Thursday. And kind of the last thing on the match before we talk about kind of the future and where Hearts go from here is the big thing is a lack of reaction. I think we've not seen much of a reaction from the team this season when things have got tough. You look at Falkirk, it just, as soon as Falkirk scored, you never felt that Hearts were to get back into it. Did well. Like, I thought there was a moment where at Motherwell you thought, right, Hearts could go and get the second goal here and get an equaliser, but certainly wasn't the case when it went down 1-0 to Pilsen, and definitely wasn't the case yesterday. Do you think that's more of a confidence mentality issue?
Yeah, 100%. This is where I have a bit more sympathy for footballers. I think this is where sometimes as fans, we can sometimes misconstrue low confidence as a lack of effort. And I don't think there's been a lack of effort amongst the players this season, but there's certainly been an abundance of a lack of confidence. And I think, again, sometimes I'll misuse the word responsibility when I'm talking about players maybe wanting to get their foot on the ball and maybe, drive forward. But again, I just don't think we've got a lot of players that are capable of doing that, especially from midfield to up front. So again, I don't think it's a case that the players aren't willing. I just think they don't have the confidence. And again, that goes back to what can be done during the week to fix that. What can you do during training drills to try and install that confidence? Because until we get a result, and again, yesterday wasn't about the performance per se. If we'd played that way yesterday and came away with a 1-0, that would have been a big result, because it maybe then would have led to a bit of momentum and confidence building to then move on to better displays. But unfortunately, we were at the wrong side of a 1-0. So again, where do the players take confidence before they go back into the league campaign again after the international break? This is where there's a concern. There's nothing that we can do recruitment-wise, really. I know that there's free agents and that kicking about, but then there's the usual concerns around whether players are match fit. If you start to look at anyone who's been out of contract for 2 or 3 months and not had a proper pre-season, so that has its sort of drawbacks. I think for me that the obvious choice would be to go into that well of B team players that have performed well now for about the last 18 months. I'm thinking Callum Sandilands, Finlay Pollock, James Wilson and Macaulay Tate. They're probably the 4 main ones that I think can all offer something a little bit different to what we have in the team just now. And again, it's not about them turning things around fully, but it can maybe just give other people just a little bit of a boot up the backside and just bring a bit of freshness to the squad as well.
Yeah, bringing a comment, I was going to bring this in anyway. Michael Wright says the way we try to press the ball is very predictable, and I think we need to mix up. What are your thoughts on whether Pollock could be the midfielder to run beyond the strikers? So I've watched a few games of the B team this season, and Pollock is the most exciting player at Hearts at the moment, because he is a winger who gets the ball and then wants to take on his fullback. He wants to run with the ball, and he's very, very, very quick. Probably quicker than any of the wingers we've got in this squad now. And that's where yesterday I was like, I could see why maybe Naismith didn't bring him on, just because, especially later on when it was getting was getting a wee bit dicey. Do you want to bring him on at that time? But at the same time, I think just a young boy would just playing for Hearts. I think he would thrive no matter what. Just want to get the ball and try and show something. But he's certainly someone I would like to see more of. Callum Sandilands is the player that Michael kind of talked about in terms of a midfielder who's got a willingness to run beyond the striker. His goals and assists over the last couple of years from midfield in the Lone League has been brilliant. Macaulay Tate, he was. There was a bit of a red flag when we went down to Fleetwood and he stayed with he's got minutes with the B team on the Friday night, I think it was, and then went down to Fleetwood and played Blair Spittle as a number 6. That I was frustrated by that, but he's obviously a talented player. Then you'd expect James Wilson to get hopefully minutes this season. And then I know you and Murray mentioned it yesterday on Twitter. Adam Forrester, right back as well.
Yeah.
Again, he's someone who has impressed me. I'm not whether he's as the physicality is there as a defender in Scottish football. I'm not too sure. It's only until you see them in that environment. But in terms of height, good presence, and he's a very good footballer as well. So there are definitely guys who are performing well and that you can look to within the B team and perhaps will hopefully be looked at over the coming weeks.
Yeah, and I look, even if Steven Naismith wanted to look at this from a selfish point of view in terms of self-preservation, he should surely be looking at it as, right, when I got the job, what was kind of my manifesto? So one of them was trying to get us being more aggressive and on the front foot. Let's be honest, that hasn't really happened thus far. What would have been one of the other key points in me getting this appointment? Nurturing young players that I've spent the last year with in the B team and potentially making money out of those players further down the line. Surely if, one of the key parts of that manifesto isn't working, go to the other one. Try and, even if it's just for your own self-preservation, at least you can turn around to the board and say, well, look, I'm actually looking a bit more long-term. I've started to get 4 or 5 players integrated in with the first team squad. And although the results haven't picked up straight away, I'm confident that over time it can. He doesn't have any of this to fall back on just now because all we're really doing is lurching from one performance to another where, yep, the formations may be changing week to week, but nothing about our sort of patterns of play or variances is changing at all. There's nothing really identifiable about Hearts and how we want to progress the ball from the back. It's very much just, play the ball right to left as much as we can. And again, we're asking our midfielders to come deep to collect the ball when they should be in pockets of space, making it harder for the low block to try and deal with that movement, which should then in turn offer the space to the likes of Shankland that they haven't been getting up to this point. I mean, really, we could be playing anyone up front just now. We could be taking Donald Ford out of retirement and place him up front, and it wouldn't make any difference because we're not creating any opportunities for even Shankland just now. Even if he was in form, I think it'd be very difficult for him to reach those heights he last season because he's not getting a sniff really in and around the box.
I thought the most telling moment yesterday of his frustration was when it got played into him. I think maybe Penrice played into him and he lost it, and the game was still going on. And he was
reminiscing the first half, wasn't it?
Yeah, stood shouting at Penrice, and then
so.
straight away it was like massive frustration because he's obviously just not. And then he's obviously, I think he's won the effort late in the second half where it was like an overhead kick and it just ballooned into the Gorgie stand. It was like last season that probably finds the top corner, but that's just the nature of how poor the team have been. That kind of just summed it up. So just before we kind of finish up, I'll bring in a question that Naismith got asked at the press conference yesterday. It was just about if he had any concern over his future, because I know that's there's absolutely loads of comments. I can't bring them all in but they're all very kind of similar. Talk about Naismith and the future and what everything means. And he was basically asked if he had any concern about it. I'm hopefully going to put the right clip up now.
Because if that time comes, that time will come. I think I've said before at the moment I feel that I don't think I can turn it around. I'll tell the club. It's not something that I'll be hanging on to if I do get to that point. As I said, there's been a decent turnover in players. They're a good group. They work well, but ultimately we need to show it on the pitch. We need to be a harder team to beat. We need to have more ruthless streak, and we need to have a bit of a swagger to say, no, we're going to give all we can, and not fear about what might happen in the negative sense, because I feel we're doing that too much at the moment.
Apologies, I think it was very, very quiet there, so apologies for that. But essentially, what he was asked about if had any concern for his position, such as the run, such as the kind of the frustration from the fans. What did you make of his kind of answer to that?
Yeah, I think straight away it probably points to a lot of self-confidence, which I think someone who's played the game at the highest level is bound to have. So it's not a huge surprise to hear him sort of back himself. I think also he's been at the club now for, I think it's 6.5 years now. So he has seen how this board have operated with other managers, and I think he's probably quite confident that they don't really pull the trigger too quickly, even when there's been examples of when it maybe needed to be pulled 2 or 3 months beforehand. So, you know, he was at Hearts when Craig Levein probably outstayed his welcome, and he was also there and he saw everything that sort of happened with Robbie over time as well. So I think a mixture of those two things, his experience of being at the club and seeing how the board operate in similar circumstances, but also his own self sort of confidence is probably why he's gave that answer. And again, I don't really blame him. I don't really think there'll be a change just now. I can't imagine there will be. Now, whether there should be, I'm not going to answer it, because again, it's not as, for me anyway, it's not as simple as saying Steven Naismith's either a good or bad manager. And I do think there's more long-term structural problems that I think the club need to address anyway, away from just the managerial role. But yeah, look, hopefully he turns it around, you know. But again, I don't think Celtic is the barometer that we need to use to determine whether there is a sort of reaction to this, because we could very well go to Parkhead the same way we went over to Pilsen a couple of weeks ago and put in quite a disciplined performance with a flat back five, and you know, come away with a 1-0 defeat or maybe even a 0-0 draw if we're lucky. But again, it all boils down to what we can do in these other fixtures. St Mirren away, Ross County at home, we're away to Pittodrie and Easter Road next month. Those are the types of fixtures where I think Steven Naismith's sort of legacy, whether that extends beyond the next few months or not, remains to be seen on the strength of those games rather than what happens at Parkhead in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, I think, especially with this 2 weeks, and you always worry about the international break, because, from a manager's point of view, because that's when it's kind of natural to make any changes, because it gives you time, it gives you a wee bit of breathing space, and you go back maybe 10 months or maybe 12, it was going into an international break, and there was a lot of noise around Naismith, and we won at Fir Park. Good performance, 1-2-1, and it eased the pressure a bit. I like you. I don't think there'll be any change. I'm always one to, maybe not when I was younger, but give managers a bit of patience, give them a bit of time. But I do think, yeah, like you said, Celtic Park's not the barometer. There needs to be visible improvement away at St Mirren and home at Ross County to basically show that we have used these 2-3 weeks to sort issues out, and this is how we are going to play going forward. But at the same time, I asked Naismith yesterday about the style of play, because it's not, this Hearts side is not a Hearts side that I recognise or I relate to. Don't enjoy watching it. But he kind of pointed back that he just wins are the important thing now, which, yeah, I think that kind of what relieves pressure. But longer term, even if you
again, that just it means that you'll just have a circular conversation about him again in 2 or 3 months' time. For a manager, I'm hoping that was just a post-match thing, and I get that managers will always say things that they don't always mean. But if that is his belief that it's just about results, then fine. You get results for a month or so, but because of the evidence of the past 12 months, it just means that when our next bad running form comes, which it will for clubs our size, the circular conversation around your future will continue to happen. This is where managers, in particular boardroom level at clubs in this country, need to break this cycle. They need to look past the next 2 weeks. And I get that I suppose we have a responsibility to that as well as fans. We've got to be patient, but I think we've been patient with Steven Naismith. We've watched this for over a year. So I do think the fans have been patient. If you think back to other games like last season, there was a home game against Livingston where we were really poor. We couldn't break them down. The fans were brilliant that night. And then we eventually got a goal late on with Vargas. But the fans have showed up. They're still showing up in numbers to home and away fixtures. I think the fans are wanting this to turn round. But, you know, ultimately they're failing the eye test just now. And even if you use black and white stats around a running form that we had over 3 months last year, it doesn't take away the fact that what we're seeing just now shows no signs of changing. And this is why there needs to be some form of significant change from a personnel point of view in terms of getting some of the younger players in, or a significant change in terms of our style and play, which I don't think you do mid-season. I just don't think that comes mid-season. So it needs to be finding the right personnel now to suit how he wants us to play. And that's why you need to look at the B team, because, again, free agents just bring too many sort of concerns with it.
Yeah, and YouTube commentators, don't judge him on Celtic. What next? Don't judge him on Aberdeen. We're not saying don't judge him on Celtic. We're just like Celtic's. What we're going to see from the Celtic game is not a great barometer of what it's going to be at St Mirren or at Ross County.
No, because he's shown as a manager that he can cope with those situations. We got 2 results against Celtic last year. We played pretty well at home to Rangers and away to Pilsen when we didn't have the ball. That's the point we're trying to make. It's not about it's a free hit. No game should be viewed as a free hit. What we're saying, though, is that that's not a sign or a barometer of judging Naismith as to whether he's learned any of the lessons that have come during the last 4 or 5 games. That's all we're meaning. Yeah,
exactly. Because it's the like home at Dundee United, 2 shots on target, and then you look at the shots on target the whole season. Not had more than 3, which is galling. To say the least. And like you said, the XG has been very, very poor. But we will wrap it up there. We appreciate everyone who has listened and contributed, and there's absolutely loads of comments on YouTube. I'll struggle to keep up with them while also listening to and conversing with Scott. Appreciate everyone who continues to read, etc., etc. We hope you have a very nice international break and have a nice wee break away from watching Hearts. I'll be back, or Hearts and will be back at some point later on this week. Until then, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Scott, and goodbye.